Hi, it's me. That little voice inside your head. You spent all year taking care of business. Let Office Depot Office Max take care of you. There's this new HP Pavilion laptop with 8th generation Intel Core i5 processor. Save $200. Now just $449. Look at it. It's only $449 at Office Depot Office Max. Go ahead. You deserve it.
Taking care of business.
Offer ends 11/11. Limit 1.
Welcome to the Full Court Press Podcast. Insights and observations from around the National Basketball Association. We aim to provide an intellectual and analytical perspective to what is happening on the court. Here's your host, Glenn Willis.
Welcome back to this edition of the Full Court Press NBA Podcast. This is episode 40, brought to you by MyBookie AG. More on them later in the episode. I am Glenn Willis. He is Greg Willis. Last week, we covered roughly half the teams in the Eastern Conference. As advertised, we're going to cover 8 teams in the Western Conference today. Had a little bit of difficulty narrowing down on which 8 we wanted to cover because there's so many interesting things going on out there. We decided to, in the end, kind of wait on 2 teams, that being Portland and Utah. Portland, still trying to figure out what their wing play is going to look like. And for me, most interestingly, Nurkic is not quite making the impact that I think everyone had hoped for. I'm not settling in on that kind of being something that's not going to happen this year. I think it's more likely than not that he's going to help them quite a bit. So thought it might be advisable to wait a couple weeks. And Utah, really interesting team, but Ricky Rubio is basically firing away like a real shooter, and nothing wrong with them becoming a little bit creative on how they're going to try to generate offense. But thought 2 more weeks of observation probably made the most sense for them as well.
Yeah, the other team we're kind of punting on right now is Houston as well. So I just want to throw them out there. A lot of interesting things going on with them with the Chris Paul injury, but I'm sure we'll tackle them next time around.
Yeah, and it seems like every time I was kind of prepping to talk about one of the teams on our outline for tonight, that Houston kind of popped up there. So Houston's kind of playing like a team that no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to avoid talking about them to some degree. James Harden is largely repeating the season he had last year, and now everybody's waiting to see how things look when Chris Paul returns, just like Greg just mentioned. So we're going to talk about Memphis, Oklahoma City, Minnesota, Los Angeles Clippers, Denver Nuggets, the Golden State Warriors. Have to talk about the Warriors, and then the 2 teams that kind of got more interesting the closer we got to recording were the Lakers and the Suns, who are doing some interesting things amongst teams that were supposed to be on the dead bottom of that Western Conference. But as we started last week with kind of a new tradition in terms of how to get started with in-season episodes, a player performance of the week and a team performance of the week. My player performance of the week, I'm going to give it to Malik Monk in the home victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. Entered that game just 21 of 68 from the field. That's rough 31%. The Hornets' previous game versus the Bucks, Monk went 1 of 6 from the field, 0 of 3 from the three-point line. But in that second matchup this past Wednesday night over the Bucks, he was 10 out of 17 from the field, including 5 of 8 from 3. 25 points on 17 shooting possessions. This was a game in which the Bucks on defense, with their length, was able to limit Kemba Walker to 12 field goal attempts. He was solid in that game, but certainly did not see the offensive volume you'd normally see from Kemba and as Charlotte win. But Malik Monk was able to really put together a strong offensive production in that game, made a big difference. And for a team like the Hornets trying to get back into the playoffs after missing last year, this is the type of win that can really benefit them and be potentially one of those 5, 6, 7 games when you look back in the season, look back and thought, well, that's one of those games that really made a difference in terms of where they ended up in the Eastern Conference seeding. So, Greg, which player performance caught your eye this week in the way that you wanted to consider it award-worthy?
Well, one of the biggest games of the week, I thought, and interesting games of the week was Friday night when Boston played in Oklahoma City. So my performance of the week is going to go to Al Horford. Had a very nice, efficient game in the box score, but I think that his impact on the game went well beyond the box score. Boston won that game 101-94. It was a back and forth battle all night. Oklahoma City tended to stay ahead by a few, but never really ran away with it. And late, Boston closed it out. Horford played 34 minutes. He had 20 points on 8 of 10 shooting from the field. He was 4 of 4 from the three-point line. He had 8 rebounds and 4 assists. So not really spectacular. Very, very nice game, but nothing spectacular. But I thought he was the real difference maker down the stretch. Boston is one of the teams, and there are several, that are playing without what we would call a traditional point guard. And, Kyrie is certainly more of a scorer. He'll get his assists, but he's not really a 20 and 10 type of guy. He's really, again, more of a scorer, whether he's attacking an ISO or whether he's catching and shooting, which he's terrific at. And that some of the teams, and one we'll talk about later, the impact of not having a traditional point guard in a close game in the fourth quarter can create some problems on the offensive end. What Al Horford does is he negates the need for a traditional point guard, not just because he plays point forward and not just because they run offense through him, but his vision and his control on the offensive end. He's the guy making sure that everybody is where they're supposed to be and doing what they're supposed to do. You see him being vocal. You see him giving directions. And what this means is Kyrie doesn't have to think about that extra workload, that extra mental workload, and he's able to just do what he does in terms of scoring and creating problems for the opposing defense. In that game, Kyrie had 25 points and 6 assists, shot 10 and 22 from the field. Again, not terrific, but he had some really big buckets down the stretch. And a lot of that came because Al Horford was in control, really playing quarterback without the ball in a way, and really running that offense just by giving verbal communication, nonverbal communication, and making sure everyone knew what they were doing and where they were supposed to be on the offensive end. So he was a big, big difference maker for me in that game.
Yeah, and Horford's just the type of guy that that first half was really rough for the Celtics. If I recall correctly, I think Kyrie was scoreless in the first half.
I think that's right.
But in situations like that, Horford is just such a calming person. Helps not only keeps his own composure, helps his team keep their composure. Obviously, Brad Stevens is doing a wonderful job coaching that team without Gordon Hayward, and just kept them settled. Oklahoma City was very effectively trapping the ball out of Kyrie's hands, and Kyrie was being a little bit kind of desperate in terms of not getting any points on the board and really not doing what he could do to help punish those traps, but made the adjustment at halftime. And certainly I agree that Horford really kept them settled and calm as they came back. My team performance of the week, this was a tough one because there were so many good games this week. I'm going to go with the Philadelphia 76ers in Houston on Monday. I chose this one because of the resilience that I saw that they demonstrated after losing at home to the Rockets just 5 days prior to this game on a buzzer beater by Eric Gordon. I talked about it last week, what I thought was a non-call on a pretty obvious offensive foul by James Harden on Joel Embiid, who was trying to close out on Gordon, who hit that three-pointer to win. Tremendous effort in this game, especially by Jared Bayless, 40 minutes from him. A lot of on-the-ball defensive responsibility for him in this game. When you try to think about the best, 5 to 10 perimeter defensive players in the league, Bayless almost never comes to mind, if ever. But tremendous effort from Bayless in this game. And Ben Simmons also 38.5 minutes a game. They were able to limit Embiid to 25 minutes in this game, was great. We can get a win on the road against a good team like Houston and still stay disciplined with the workload you're trying to manage with Embiid. Mike D'Antoni basically went with a 7-man rotation. That's a playoff-like rotation, a postseason-like rotation, in an effort to try to get this win. But the Sixers got out with a really nice win on the season. So I just love the resilience to go on the road and beat a team that's considered to be one of the best, probably 2, 3 of the most best teams in the league after losing in really frustrating fashion the prior week. So the Sixers on the road at Houston get my team performance of the week. What team gets yours?
Well, I'm going to go with the Pistons, one of the real surprise teams so far this year. And I'm going to go with their win last Sunday night, actually, while we were recording, they were tipping off. So it's a game that I followed after we kind of ended our recording last week. So it's a little bit in the rearview mirror, but I want to stay with that one because it was really impressive for me. They were coming off. This was a back-to-back on the road on the West Coast. On Saturday night, they beat the Clippers 95-87, terrific defensive effort. And then they go in and play Golden State on Sunday night, and they win 115-107. So getting back-to-back road wins on the West Coast against the Clippers and against Golden State is quite impressive. It was a really interesting game. Golden State really led for the first 2.5 quarters and stayed in control. Midway through the third quarter, the Pistons were down 13. And then from there, they won on an 18-4 run, basically with some starters out of the game. It was guys like Reggie Bullock and Ish Smith were in the game. Really, they just, when Golden State, even though they kept two of their big four starters on the floor at all times, at least you have your bench in there playing some bench guys for Golden State. When Golden State didn't have all four starters in, and when Detroit went to their bench, Detroit's bench actually just smoked them for about 8-10 minutes in the game. They finished the third quarter on an 18-4 run, started the fourth quarter on a 20-7 run. So they went from down 13 to up 13, and up 13 when Golden State comes back and has all their starters in except for Zaza. Iguodala is in playing with that group as he always does in the fourth quarter. But the game had changed a great deal during a stretch where Steve Kerr was kind of getting guys in and out of the game. Golden State, as it was expected, came back with a furious comeback, pulled within 3, but Detroit held on in the final minutes of that game, played really just quality basketball on both ends, made really good decisions, and executed really well to get that win. To me, if I take the coach's perspective on this game, my MVP was Andre Drummond. Now, Andre Drummond shot 4 out of 17 from the field, but he was definitely the MVP in that game. He had 18 rebounds, 5 assists, and 5 steals. But what he did is he played 40 minutes on the second end of a back-to-back on the West Coast. He played the first 10 minutes of the game, sat until midway through the second quarter, and he finished the game midway through the second quarter. He played the entire rest of the game. Now, we talk about teams deciding between offensive centers who give you sort of stretch shooting or give you some type of skill on the offensive end versus guys who can really help you defensively. And in this case, Stan Van Gundy stayed with Andre Drummond all the way through the game. And here's the impact. If you go back and watch that game, and if the listeners have access to go back and watch games, go back and watch the way Detroit in the second half, during that stretch when they won on that huge run between midway through the third quarter and midway through the fourth quarter, they overplayed every screen and every pass that Golden State made. They were playing deny basketball the entire way. Golden State will normally kill you when you play deny basketball because they are so good at the backdoor cuts. But what Andre Drummond did was he was able to give help when the backdoor cut was there, deflect passes, play the passing lane, and even when they would connect on the pass to the cutter, he was able to defend the cutter, and if the pass was made to the man he was leaving to cut, he was able to recover, get back to the rim, and defend. Andre Drummond basically played one-on-two defense in the middle so that everyone else on the floor could overplay every pass, every screen, and every cut, and that is how they beat Golden State. Now, if they played the same defense every game, I'm sure Golden State would come back and make some other adjustments. But I can tell you, if I'm an NBA coach and I see that, I'm not saying that's the way to beat Golden State, but what I'm saying is I want someone that maybe can play an Andre Drummond type role in the defensive end. There's not a lot of those guys. But there's a formula now that's out there that gives teams a better chance than they had before. It's almost like football coaches seeing a weakness, something they can exploit. Basketball's a lot tougher because you got to have the kind of big that can play sort of that free safety defense and down around the basket and still cover 2 guys. But at the same time, you got to have the guys who overplay. Of course, Golden State would make adjustments next time around, but it's something that I hadn't seen before in a long time in terms of a team on defense being the aggressor instead of reading and reacting and trying to just do the best that they can. So that's why I want to go back to Detroit. That was a really, really big win that they got back-to-back wins on the road on the West Coast is something that they should be quite proud of.
Yeah, Detroit is, I agree, one of the more interesting teams in the league. And when this popped up on the outline, I went back and took a look. Third and fourth quarter of this game, Detroit held Golden State 24 points and 26 points. That's two pretty successful defensive. Now, most situations you're like, okay, that's an average, acceptable kind of result. But to keep them, around 25 points a quarter in the third and fourth quarter, excellent. The other thing that jumped out at me, Golden State shot 57% from the field in this game. Lost. You talked about how they were trying to kind of create turnovers, but I don't know if you're looking at it, but I love playing this game with you. You can always go, I'm terrible at guessing, but it's fun for me. Do you want to guess how many personal fouls Detroit had in this game?
I looked pretty hard at the box score on this game today, but I can't recall. I'll go with 14.
9.
Wow.
Against Golden State, they've been the best offensive team in the league going on at least 3 years now. 9 personal fouls. That's the fingerprint of discipline, right? So even though Golden State shot 57%, which even for them is a pretty high watermark performance, Detroit just created a lot more possessions. Basically, they said, okay, we can't keep up with you in efficiency wise. Nobody can. So we're just going to do everything we can to create as many possessions as we can. And that worked out. And then I also want to throw a little love before we get into the Western Conference teams towards Andre Drummond. Not staggering, but if you look across his career on a per 36-minute basis, never more than 1.3 assists per 36 minutes, up to 3. That's pretty noteworthy. 3 assists per 36 minutes, 2.5 turnovers. If you have a center that is creating more assists and turnovers, just the way that big man, where they get the ball and how they're expected to operate the ball, that's pretty good. And I also know as a coach, you love the fact that he's never shot, 1 year he shot better than 40% from the free throw line. This year is 75%. So anything else you have on that?
And I'll add, it reminds me in terms of being a coach's player, like I said, Drummond was 4 for 17 from the field. You know, a lot of players, when they're struggling with their shot or they're struggling with him around the basket, it's going to affect the rest of their game. It absolutely did not affect the rest of his game, his defense, his passing. He twice went in and actually got absolutely rejected at the rim by JaVale McGee. And both times the ball came loose, went to the corner, and both times he busted his tail, got to the corner, recovered the ball, and made a pass that resulted in a basket. So you want to talk about a guy playing 40 minutes on back-to-back, and in the fourth quarter, you get your shot block, and you're the one that chases it down and creates the next basket. That's incredible basketball that you won't. This is the type of stuff you won't see in the box score, but you do see in the standings as you go throughout the season.
Okay, this is supposed to be a Western Conference podcast episode, but certainly enjoy talking about Pistons. Interesting that the season started with the perception around that organization being that Stan was ready to get rid of Reggie, and Stan was half ready to get rid of Andre. Playing pretty solid basketball, pretty successful Western Coast trip. Even Reggie now is doing more facilitating than I think I've ever seen him do before. And both Tobias Harris and Avery Bradley are benefiting, getting the ball moved to the weak side more than you typically see with Reggie at the point guard offense. Okay, let's go to the Western Conference. We'll start with Memphis. As we always say here, we root for everyone, but I did make the statement in the preview that the Grizzlies might be the team I'm rooting for this season. Everyone, as with the last 4 seasons, maybe last 5 seasons, everyone's saying time to blow it up, beyond time to blow it up, now past time to blow it up. But they believe in their organization. They believe in their culture. Moved on from some cherished players in Zebo and Vince. 6-3 heading into their game tonight at the Lakers. Wins over Golden State, 2 over Houston, 1 over the Clippers. One of their losses was a 2-point loss versus Orlando, a game in which Mike Conley didn't play. Orlando was in the middle of a really good, strong stretch for them. 4th in defensive rating, and they're 4th in defensive rating. And they played Golden State, who's 1st, the Clippers, who's 2nd in offensive rating. These are offensive rating. And they played Houston twice, considered probably to be one of the top 3 offenses in the league, although they're not quite measuring up there quite yet. And then Orlando, who was an offensive juggernaut at the time. So that type of schedule and your 4th in defensive rating. Lowest turnover rate, that's possession adjusted. Mike Conley is really not shooting the ball well at all yet. That will improve. Gasol is playing well and rebounding the ball well again. His rebounding numbers kind of cratered last year as he was adjusting to playing a little further from the basket than he had previously. On a per 36-minute basis, best rebounding numbers in his career. They've not been able to get contributions from Ben McLemore and JaMychal Green as of yet. They hope to have those two guys back in about 2 weeks. In their absence, both James Ennis and Tyreke Evans are providing excellent play. Grizzlies are 6th in points off turnovers. Add that to the 4th best defensive rating. You can see which end of the court is kind of the foundation of everything that they're doing. They're number 1 in opponents' points off turnovers. So, for example, their opponents have the fewest points off turnovers in the league, and they're 5th best in opponents' points in the paint, 3rd best in opponent 3-point percentage. So we'll have to see if that holds up. But typically, the thinking is that teams can affect opponent 3-point attempts, but not percentage. But when you are 5th best in opponent points in the paint and 3rd best in opponent 3-point percentage, what I see is excellent defensive rotations. Not a surprise if Isbell have that attention to detail and focus. I would still prefer to start at the 4. Gasol is such a skilled and athletic, rangy, lanky 5 that I think that if you played right at the 4 next to him, the extensive skill set Gasol has would allow Wright to kind of blend in as a kind of a lower skilled big, energy big. But because of the fact that Wright is still playing off the bench, a lot of minutes off the bench, that means that they are not comfortable giving Deontay Davis any time, just 3 minutes played on the season so far. I had thought that maybe Davis in his second year would be ready to contribute, but with Wright playing all of the second unit minutes to 5, that says everything you need to know about how they feel about Davis. But they are such a smart, opportunistic team. 10th, for example, in terms of the opportunistic team, they're 10th fewest in transition possessions, but 8th most points per possession in transition. 5th most efficient team with the ball handler in the pick and roll, and 5th most efficient working through the roll man in the pick and roll. The only other team that's top 5 in both those categories, Golden State and Milwaukee, who both have like, you think about a 7-footer Kevin Durant running a pick and roll. You think about a 7-footer Giannis operating a pick and roll. Well, Memphis doesn't have one of those, and they're still top 5 in both of those categories. Going into facing the Lakers tonight. After that, they play at Portland, at Houston, at Milwaukee, so kind of a tough road trip. But an opportunity to get to 3-0 versus Houston this week. And then weirdly, they play their 4th and final game of the year versus Houston on November 18th. So that's before kind of late November even gets here. Is kind of odd schedule quirk, but they get them twice in the next 2 weeks and could get a tiebreaker, even though no one expects them to probably even finish within like 10 wins at Houston, but we shall see. Greg, anything with the Memphis Grizzlies that you're seeing you want to talk about?
No, I mean, the one thing that I talked about in the season preview was this is a team that's not going to give you anything easily. So if teams aren't on their A game and they're not organized, if they're playing a little bit sloppy, turning the ball over, Memphis is going to capitalize on every mistake that you make. That's the type of team that they are. They're a team that minimizes their own mistakes and capitalizes on their opponent's mistakes. So what that means is even when they're struggling on offense, they still have a good chance to win because they are still being responsible. They're taking care of things on the defensive end. They're forcing their style of play. The rotation that they're using there right now is a little bit more than we expected, with Harrison's really kind of getting a lot of starts there. James Ennis is getting a lot of playing time. Even second round pick Dylan Brooks, who's really kind of flying way below the radars, playing almost 30 minutes a game off the bench, which is a little bit crazy. So I think the way David Fizdale is kind of lining it up is they do have some new players in there, and they're trying to figure things out a little bit on the offensive end. But when you give maximum effort on defense and you communicate and you work hard and you give your opponent nothing easy on the defensive end, you're going to give yourself a chance to win even when you're trying to figure things out on the other end of the court.
Absolutely enjoying watching this team. A little notification popped up here. We talked about the fact that Houston's not on our outline, but they just force you to talk about them. I think 3.5 minutes left in Houston and Utah, and Harden has 56 points, so he's going for 60. Actually, I guess he's out of the game. 56 points in 20 minutes play.
Yeah, I just noticed he had 54 at the end of 3 is the alert that popped up for me. So
56 points in 20 minutes. A record maybe. I'm not sure when we started tracking exact minutes played. I'm sure it's after Wilt's 100. That wasn't even. I'm not sure captured on video. Anyway, that could be a whole other podcast. Let's move over to Oklahoma City. Definitely one of the most fascinating teams heading into the season with the contract extension for Russ that looked like most of the summer like was something he was different about at best. But the Paul George trade gets another all-star onto that team, and then the Carmelo trade just, I think, the day before Media Day, if not 2 days before Media Day. A team that has looked really good to me for stretches, but they're sitting at 4-4 right now. A loss to Utah and Utah's home opener. No surprise for really any team there. Hard to beat a good team in their home opener. 2 losses to Minnesota. First loss was the game Carmelo had a 3 with 5 seconds left, and Wiggins came back and got that really effective or / borderline foul screen from Karl-Anthony Towns. That Wiggins hit that 3-pointer from 29 feet at top of the key. And then in Minnesota, Carmelo couldn't convert a would-be buzzer beater. So very close games there. And Friday night, we talked about it with your Horford award. At home versus the Celtics, they had complete control of the game heading into the half. As we said, Kyrie was scoreless in the first half and was ridiculous down the stretch. And then Oklahoma City in that game, down the stretch of the second half, was really focused on finding mismatches, playing a bit in isolation, and with less ball movement. And we've seen more ball movement, usually from them this season so far. So, Greg, I know you've been really tracking this team closely, so tell me what you're seeing in this Oklahoma City team.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest surprises in the league this year is that Russell Westbrook is third in scoring on his own team, playing for Oklahoma City. And so I'm not sure the idea. I mean, I know the idea was really to have more of a balanced attack on offense, but I'm not sure if that's really the full idea. Oklahoma City has one player who's in the top 10 in field goal attempts per game, and that's not Russell Westbrook, it's Carmelo Anthony. So, maybe there's a tweak in the formula that they need to figure out. And really, we're joking about it a little bit, but it's important because Carmelo is the type of guy. He's always been the kind of player. You talk about shot selection and scorers. So there are scorers who they're going to take a great shot, a good shot, and they're going to take an okay shot. Every time they have a great shot, a good shot, or an okay shot, it's going up. And that's Carmelo Anthony. When you get several elite players who come together, those players need to learn that they can be a little bit more selective with those shots, and they can pass up an okay shot and trust that someone else is going to get a better shot. That's something that when LeBron went to Miami and he played with Dwayne Wade and he played with Chris Bosh, they were able to do that. They were able to find a way to work together to take higher percentage shots as a group than maybe they would have taken in the past when they didn't play together. So that's something that Carmelo, Russell Westbrook, his field goal attempts are down from 24 per game to 16 per game. But Carmelo is still jacking up 18 a game. So Russell Westbrook has made the adjustment, but Carmelo Anthony hasn't. So they've got some things to figure out on the offensive end. But I will say that Russell Westbrook has only attempted 20 field goal attempts twice this year, and Oklahoma City lost both games. So I think they're still figuring things out on the offensive end. Now, we talked in the preseason how maybe they would be a little bit they would be better on defense, but we weren't sure how the formula would work on offense. An offensive rating last year, they were 16th. They've moved to 10th. And last year in defensive rating, they were 10th, and they moved to 2nd. So in terms of offensive rating and defensive rating, they've gotten better in both respects. But where the reason they're 4-4 is they just haven't been able to close out the close games. The close loss to Minnesota at home, the close loss to Minnesota on the road, and then controlling the game against Boston throughout the game, but losing again. And they struggled. And we talked last week about Toronto and how they controlled the game at Golden State, but they went ISO with DeMar DeRozan in the game and couldn't convert. and got outscored 10-0 at the end of the game. That's similar to what happened between Boston and Oklahoma City. So how do you take three elite scorers? How do you get the high percentage shot late in the game when you have an elite closer like Russell Westbrook? But how do you do that without slowing the game down, putting the ball in one guy's hands, have him stand there and dribble and take whatever shot he wants? As a coach, you've got to challenge your players. Yes, we can get the ball to Russ. We can ask him to be the guy that takes the shot, but we've got to have motion. The ball's got to move. Players got to move. Screen action. The ball moves to maybe both sides of the floor, and then we get it where we want it to go. That's a really big, important part of closing out games on the offensive end. That's the one place that Oklahoma City has struggled this year, and they need to figure that out. If they're going to be an above-average team, we've talked about the big bubble of teams behind Golden State in the West. If they're going to be at the top of that bubble, if they're going to be a 2 seed or a 3 seed, they're going to have to figure out how to win those close games against good teams late. And rather than just putting the ball in Russ's hands and let him dribble it out and attack from wherever he is, they need to work together and have screen action, ball movement, challenge the defense. Don't make it easy for them to defend you, and then that'll give them a better chance to closing those games out. And I think that's really the one thing that stuck out to me the most with Oklahoma City so far.
So I have one specific question for you about Russell Westbrook. Didn't put this in the outline, so just get your top of mind response. I think one of the most profound observations, not talking about like my observations profound, one of the more profound dynamics with Russell Westbrook in the Oklahoma City Thunder last few years. In games, so like last year, Westbrook could take all the there were no restrictions, there were no limitations. We talked about when we did the preview, usage of 41.7% was the highest since the days that Michael Jordan played about 20 minutes a game with Washington and took all the shots in the game. So it's historically high usage rate last year. But in games where his shot was not falling, what he would do is he would force the contact, go to the free throw line 2 or 3 times in 5 or 6 trips on the floor. He'd make his free throws, and then that would get his jump shot falling again. And it was foolproof that he could do that whenever he wanted. This year, he's trying to be more of a facilitator and distributor. His free throw attempts are down from 14.7 per 36 to 8.1, and he's not even shooting 65% at the line. As we know, the rules have changed significantly in terms of what the officials being very specific about whether you've gathered to begin your shot yet or not for it to be a shooting foul or not. And I think that the rule change and his being a facilitator is impacting him at the free throw line. And in the past, he's used his physicality and his ability to get to the free throw line. So say he's 1 of 6 from the floor and he's missed 4 consecutive jump shots. 2 trips to the free throw line, he goes 4 for 4. Next thing you know, he hits his next 2 jump shots. And so that's been a huge part of him getting his offensive game going when he has a slow start. That seems to be maybe completely unavailable to him this year. Are you seeing that at all?
Yes, I am. I did notice that adjustment with his free throw attempts, the volume. Last year I took a look at it. Last year, Oklahoma City outscored their opponent at the free throw line. This year, they're getting outscored by 4 points per game at the free throw line. The one other thing I noticed, though, that kind of goes hand in hand is they've gone from 16th in pace to 23rd in pace. And Russell Westbrook's team needs to play faster. That's my opinion. And, in order for Russ to get to the line, yes, he used to do the up and under where he could get the foul and get the 3 free throws, but he also would just attack the rim and get the foul. But when you're playing with guys like Carmelo and Paul George, especially Paul George, who can be a distributor, I think that there are ways to get him going without having to just hand him the ball and ask him to go draw a foul. You can create opportunities like swinging the ball to the backside as a cutter where he has a chance to go get an and one and that type of situation. So I think what's happened, and one of the things I looked at too is I wanted to see if Russell Westbrook's shooting volume would make him a better shooter or a worse shooter. I think a lot of people expected that if he had to share the ball and he shot less, that he probably wouldn't feel as comfortable and his shooting numbers would struggle. But he's actually shooting better. He's shooting for a higher percentage on 3-point baskets. The free throws lines, like you said, the free throws are not there, like you said. But what and this kind of straying from the question you asked me, but it's kind of related as well. But what Billy Donovan has to figure out, and what coaches of teams who have 2 or 3 elite players have to figure out, is how do I get these guys to work together but still be themselves? I think what Russell Westbrook is doing is he's trying really hard to work together, and I admire that. But Billy Donovan's got to make sure that Russell Westbrook doesn't stray too far from who Russell Westbrook is and what he does. So it's a tricky tightrope to walk. But again, and I'll say this: we look at the record, say 4-4, expectations are higher. They're not off to a good start. They're playing well. They've got 4 wins, and then 3 of their 4 losses, they played well for 42, 44 minutes. They just didn't close the games out. And, I think that's something that they can figure out. I think the formula is working. They're an elite defensive team now. They don't have to be an elite offensive team to win, but in the close games, they have to get it figured out on the offensive end. For me, I'd put the ball in Paul George's hand to start something, let Russ work off screens, or at least run some sort of pick and roll, challenge the defense, make it hard for them. Then you get the ball to Russ when the defense is moving in rotation, trying to recover, trying to help. And then Russ is going to have a lot higher scoring opportunity in front of him in that type of situation.
Yeah, to kind of close the loop on one thing you brought up in the beginning of this section was last year everyone was talking about the parallel between Golden State last year adding Kevin Durant and LeBron's first year in Miami. I always thought that was crazy because there's a debate whether Kevin Durant's the best player on the team. I think most people would say he's the best two-way player, Steph's the best offensive player. But there's debate as well. Having a 7-footer that can get off 3-pointers whenever he wants is quite an advantage. But I actually think there's a much more a close or parallel with the Oklahoma City team in that first year team in Miami. So LeBron had to learn how to not kind of basically be all the offense that first year in Miami. It's a little bit different because this is Russ, and Russ has been at OKC, but now he's going through what LeBron went through a little bit there when he went to Miami, and that Russ is learning to share offensive production and share offensive opportunities and those sorts of things. And I think what to kind of boil it down to what we're both saying is we admire the effort he's making, but they're not going to be the best version of themselves if you don't also see flashes of when Russ is just absolutely basketball games. And that's where with LeBron, you saw some games where he'd move the ball, they'd play well, and then he would in Miami, he would focus all his energy on defense, for stretches, right? But there were times when the game called for LeBron to be the dominant player in that game, and he would find those moments to be that. And I think the same process is probably in progress in Oklahoma City. We'll see how it goes. I feel good about the way they're playing. Let's see if they can kind of get the individualized talent to be the best they can be while they're operating as a team in the way they are so far this year. Let's talk about next the Minnesota Timberwolves. 4-game winning streak going into hosting Charlotte tonight. The defense has looked incredibly ugly in the early going, and both Town and Wiggins still having ugly moments in almost every game. But only the Warriors and Rockets have better records in the Western Conference heading into play today. But they're also just 21st best in net rating, so that's pretty rough net rating. But their play's been up and down. That's going to turn into kind of a volatile net rating with less than 10 games in the bank so far. 7th best offensive rating, 26th defensive rating. It's right about where they were last year. 6th best on the offensive glass, 7th best in second chance points. That's definitely been helping them keep pace offensively when their shot's not falling. So again, 7th in offensive rating, but just 28th in 3-point attempts. You and I both talk about the importance of 3-point differential in the correlation to winning teams. They're 8th in 3-point percentage. Both Towns and Teague both right at 3.5 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. In my opinion, they both need to try to roughly double that. Bielitsa, just 15 minutes a game, their best perimeter shooter by far. If you're going to be a bottom 5 defense, might as well play him more than 15 minutes, although I understand, folks, that they're trying to be a better than bottom 5 defense. They're working on that very hard. But if they're having trouble just kind of keeping pace at the 3-point line, a few more minutes for Bielitsa could be beneficial. Tyus Jones, also very good shooter from the 3-point line, is shooting it very well this year. He's basically killed them on defense when he's been in the game, but it's a little bit hard to separate that because he seems to be always playing with Jamal Crawford, who might be one of the worst defensive players in the league. That's not to say that Crawford's not helping them in other ways. Jimmy Butler not really playing like himself yet. It's hard to know how he's feeling even now after dealing with that upper respiratory infection. 1 of 4 from the field with 4 points in 33 minutes in that home win over the Mavericks on Saturday night. They won, and he took 4 field goal attempts and made one of them. Wow. Karl-Anthony Towns has basically picked up where he left off offensively last season. He was second at his position in PER last year. He's top 5 and probably trending back towards the top of that. But like I said, I would love to see him targeting about 7 or so 3-point attempts per game or per 30, roughly the same thing when Tibbs is your coach. He can make them. He has a high release point. It's hard to contest his 3-point shot. So I say let's make that happen, Coach Thibodeau. Andrew Wiggins turning the ball over about the same level he was last season. His assist rate is down even from where it was last season. We talked about his kind of the relationship between his assists and turnovers, and we talked about that extension that he got, the max contract. His usage is down a little, not a surprise to Jimmy Butler on the team. And but I have to say, so that I'm not just completely contradicting what I said about a week ago, I went on Chris's podcast last week, Almighty Baller Radio Network, to discuss the Timberwolves along with Dane Moore from Zone Coverage and the Hypothetical Timberwolves podcast. And I basically said the right time to evaluate this team is in January. 3 new starters, minutes leader off the bench is new, so 4 of your top 6 rotation guys are new. That is a lot to adjust to. And their starting lineup heading into Sunday's matchup. Another guessing game here with Greg, which I love and he hates. It basically almost refuses to participate. But net rating. So per 100 possessions, their starting lineup, do you think it's a positive or negative net rating?
I'm going to go with negative.
It's positive, and it's 10 points per 100 possessions. Just awesome net rating. I would not have been able to guess either, and the way I phrased it almost made someone think they had to pick negative.
Yeah, I thought it was a trick question, so I went that route.
I didn't mean for it to, but as soon as it came out of my mouth, I knew it sounded like a trick question. Anyway, but I think if you just look at the fact that their starting lineup is outscoring opposing lineups by 10 points per 100 possessions, that is a thing to feel really, really encouraged about. Their record's in good shape, basically third best record in the conference, even though they're not playing defense nearly as well as they hope to by midpoint of the season or so. So I just have a feeling like everything's going to be absolutely fine with this group. There are still concerns over Wiggins' limitations and sort of his ability to impact the game, and then Towns being your defensive 5. But I think all in all, there's been some ugly moments to start the season, but they're doing fine. Anything you're seeing in the Timberwolves you want to share, Greg?
Well, I mean, this team is extremely talented. I think they're going to win a lot of basketball games, even in the Western Conference. Even this early in the season, I start to think, okay, how do they look in a 7-game series against a good team? And the reason I ask that is, as a coach, you think about not just rotations and players and calling plays on the offensive end, but that's the true measure for a team is going to be how deep can you go in the playoffs, and then what do you need from your team to be the kind of team that can compete with good teams in a 7-game series. And of course, the easy answer for them is they've got to be better on defense. I've had teams that I've coached, obviously not at the NBA level, but I think basketball is basketball. I've had teams that I've coached that have struggled on the defensive end, just in terms of, and when teams struggle on the defensive end, when they're talented, it usually comes down to 2 things. 1 is energy, and 2 is the communication. And sometimes teams just don't play as hard as they need to, and they don't communicate as much as they need to on the defensive end. And my challenge to the team, and what I know as a coach too, is there are certain teams that it doesn't even matter what I say, because I just become noise to them when I keep begging them to play with energy and communicate. But there is absolutely no substitute for a team that has players that will challenge one another to play with energy and communicate on the defensive end. So what has to happen with this team, and I'm not talking them down and saying they're a bad team, but I'm talking about in order for them to achieve their maximum, to reach their ceiling, even this year, to be a contender for going deep in the playoffs. These players have to find a way to expect the most out of one another on the defensive end and not be afraid to challenge each other in a positive, supportive way, not be afraid to be verbal in what their expectations are of one another. And that's the one thing that you're missing. I'm gonna go back to teams that Kevin Garnett played on. If you relaxed on defense and didn't communicate, didn't have to say anything because Kevin Garnett was going to be in your face. And not necessarily that they have to have a Kevin Garnett type personality, but somehow on the defensive end, there's got to be a level of expectation. Jeff Teague is more of a quiet, kind of passive, just really efficient player. Jimmy Butler probably is the kind of guy, but he's the new guy in town. So somehow, some way, this team is going to have to find a way to challenge each other, push each other, expect more from one another. And I think that's what it's going to take for them to become a good enough team on the defensive end that they maybe can be an elite team in this league.
And I want to just share briefly, kind of as a summary, something else I shared with Chris and Dean when I was talking to him on that podcast. So Tibbs has the famous ice technique on the pick and roll. He's known for that, kind of has mastered that. Even just calling it icing is way oversimplifying all the different things that they do with read and react. But if you might notice that the ice is primarily designed to stop a pick and roll and to create obstacles for the pick and roll. Last year, Greg, you might recall me saying Golden State won the title and they ran fewer pick and rolls in the league than anybody. So Coach Popovich in San Antonio has gone towards more ISO. And there's a reason. It's because the league's got very good at defending pick and rolls. Also, what I talked about on the podcast was, so listeners, if you're watching, we want to really see the impact of like the whole league kind of conspiring against Tibbs. There's teams slip the pick and roll a whole lot more than they did like 10 years ago. And a slip is the number one way you can beat a pick and roll. So if you're looking for that, look for the big to come and set the pick and roll, but he never really gets to the pick. As soon as both defenders kind of overplay it, looks like a trap, but it's really not. The big guy just slips straight through and beats the two guys. And the other thing is that the ice technique, great for the actual pick and roll, but it's much more difficult to deal with dribble handoff. And we're seeing way and way more dribble handoffs than we've ever seen. So it's not just a matter of this team and this roster getting Tibbs' defense down. I think Tibbs is still needing to kind of do a little bit of refactoring in terms of the fact that the league has kind of moved away from the pick and roll being so central to what it's done. More slipping, more DHO, and those sorts of things. So I think Tibbs is still refactoring a little bit too. Before we move on, let's talk about our sponsor today, MyBookie.ag. Holiday cash. We all need it, and I know where you could get it. MyBookie is the place to score serious cash on your sports predictions. Believe it or not, the holidays are just around the corner. I said that last week, and here we are one more week closer to it. And while that means plenty of parties, gifts, spending, it also means there's a lot of football, basketball, and hockey you can score big on every day if you want. Play like the pros on game day. You can play the money line, the side, and the total. And like I said last week, if you know what all three of those things are, MyBookie is the hookup for all your betting needs. Offers super fast payouts when you win. Where you bet is just as important as who you're betting on, if not more important. And if you want to make money betting the games, go to mybookie.ag. They have odds on every matchup, a mobile site that makes wagering on your smartphone very simple. Join now, and MyBookie will match your deposit with up to a 50% bonus. Use our promo code FULLCOURT, one word, no spaces, promo code FULLCOURT to activate the offer. Visit mybookie.ag today. You play, you win, you get paid. Last week, Greg, I asked you if you'd had a chance to use the app. You have checked it out, everything. You had a crazy busy week, so I'm going to guess you haven't had a chance to make a bet there yet.
You are correct.
I know how busy your week was. Last week, I had said that I had done quite well on Sunday. I did even better today. So, again, I have kind of a first choice and second choice on NFL lines, put more money on the first choice. If that first choice covers, I'm good to go on all the rest of my betting. Have a second choice bet a little less, but then I parlay the two, and I hit on all three today, Greg. So I am quite happy with. And again, it took me about a minute and 15 seconds to get all three of those bets lined up. So I enjoy it. Go give it a try. Next, let's talk about the Los Angeles Clippers. A lot of changes for this team, too. We talked about them probably as extensively as any in the preview just because of all the change. They won their first 4 games, looked really good out of the gate. They're 1-5 since. Danilo Gallinari, I don't know if you saw today, but he left today's game with a hip injury after just 13 minutes of play. I'm not sure whether or not that could be serious. But Blake Griffin playing again. Top 10, 15 player, looked like an MVP candidate first 5 games. Hasn't really fallen off that much, but basically first 5 games were almost unsustainable. Offensive rating, second best in the league. Defensive rating, 12th best in the league. Any team will take those results, unless you're the Golden State Warriors, winners of the last 2 of the last 3 championships. Also, top 5 in rebounding. No surprise with DeAndre Jordan on this team. So a good start, some slippage in the last week. Greg, what are you seeing when you watch the Clippers play?
Well, it is from a roster construction standpoint. It's a really interesting team. One, you lost Chris Paul in free agency without really replacing him with a sort of bona fide point guard or someone who's just going to come in at least and play that role, if not play it as well, but at least play that role. That really have a guard by committee, not just point guard by committee type situation. They have a guard by committee situation. We talked in their preseason preview about the fact that where most of the league is going heavy in 1s and 2s, they've gone strong at 3, 4, 5. Gallinari starting at the 3 is really more of a 4. And then you have Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, of course. It's sort of inverting the roster in terms of the direction the league has gone, and saying it would be interesting to see how this would play. Now, they started the season 4-0. They were looking very, very good. They dropped 3 out of 4. Actually, I just looked. They lost today to Miami. Almost came back from 25 down, but now they've dropped 4 out of 5. I think Gallinari has been struggling with that hip injury leading up
So today was not the first time you've seen him struggling with the hip?
I've heard he's been struggling with it, but I'm not 100% sure. So
he left today, did not return. So
correct. He's been playing, and he has not been shooting the ball well and has not looked comfortable. So while it hasn't been specific to the fact that he's been struggling with the hip injury, he just hasn't looked 100% or hasn't looked like himself for sure. I think when we look at their losses, the loss against Detroit, they got blown out by Golden State. The loss to Memphis we talked about today. They lost to Miami. I think one thing that they're hurt, this is, we talked earlier about how Boston's one of the teams, good teams, playing without a traditional point guard. Right now, the Clippers are one of those teams playing without a traditional point guard. Just mentioned how they're sort of a guard by committee. They're a point guard by committee and guard by committee. Patrick Beverley is getting the starts. But he's definitely not a traditional point guard. He's a ball hawk, hard-nosed defender who's not going to hurt you too bad on the offensive end. But when they started with a 4-game winning streak, and especially the first 2 games, they looked very comfortable on the offensive end. Teodosic actually started the first game and the second game. And I think that what's hurt them is that when you've got talent and you've got guys at 3, 4, 5 that can handle the ball and kind of initiate offense the way Blake can, I think that works. But late in the game, it's tough to be just as efficient and clean and have really solid possessions when you don't have a traditional point guard late in the game. And what we've seen happen to them as they've dropped 4 out of 5 is we've seen them in close games struggle down the stretch in the fourth quarter. In that Detroit game, they were outscored 28-15 in the fourth quarter. I think the other 2 losses before today, they scored 24 and 24 in the fourth quarter. So it's a challenge going late into the game when you don't have a traditional point guard who can really set things up, where you can run, where you're more likely to run set plays. Games tend to become more possession, half-court based. It's something that they're missing. So without Teodosic in there, and he's got no timetable for a return at all, we're not sure how long he's going to be out. What the Clippers are going to have to do is figure out how can they be efficient on offense late in the game when the style of the game sometimes switches to a half court, slow it down, grind kind of game. Can Patrick Beverley play that role? Probably not. The guy that maybe that they would like to do it is Austin Rivers, but he hasn't been able to do that. Hasn't really been comfortable in that role so far this season. So I think what's holding them back and what Doc Rivers is going to have to figure out is the guard rotations late in the game. You mentioned, and I was going to bring it up earlier on the Oklahoma City, but you had mentioned to me in a text the other day about how the timeout rules are really preventing a lot of the offensive defensive substitutions that we normally would see late in the game from the NBA. In the last few years, the substitution rules have changed. But not only that, but like you said, the timeout rules, where coaches used to use timeouts just basically in the last 2 minutes of the game to do offense, defense substitutions to get the right 5 guys on the court. Now you can't do that. Oklahoma City's much better defensive team with Robertson on the floor. And now if you pull him off for an offensive possession, he gets stuck on the bench and someone else like Abrinas gets stuck on the floor. So Doc Rivers has got a challenge. Part of the riddle that he has to solve is how are we going to make the guard rotation work late in the game? Lou Williams is more of a volume shooter kind of a guy, not the guy who's going to play through his teammate. Patrick Beverley, again, more of a defensive player. Then Austin Rivers is the guy that he would like to do it, but just hasn't looked very comfortable in that role. So that's something that Doc is going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I do think that the change in the timeout allotment is impacting a team like the Clippers probably as much as anyone, because if they would do more offensive defense substitutions. We had the text about the Thunder specifically and how a guy like Robertson, is such a mercurial guy, really valuable one in the court, not the other. With their point guard situation being so difficult and really being an imperfect fit in terms of two-way players, you'd think that Bledsoe might be a guy that they would most love to add. Having taken a look at the trade machines or the Real GM trade function feature they have on their website, but of course he played there and a number of the guys that he played with are still on the team, but I have no idea how realistic it is. I haven't looked at it, but would be a potential solution there. We're going to talk about Phoenix here coming up. So the Clippers are kind of in a tough spot. They lost Teodosic. We'll see the impact of Gallo's injury in terms of him missing time or just being limited in what he can contribute. The big concern with Blake, because he has broken down pretty frequently in the league. Workload is certainly the biggest kind of contributor to that. And with the guys around him going down, also, Greg, I think the casual fan kind of probably doesn't have an understanding of how difficult exerting it is to bring the ball up in the NBA. It looks like the guy's just dribbling the ball up the court, but it is actually a pretty exhausting thing to do if your opponent gets you going left or right at all, especially in the fourth quarter. It's just really, really physically demanding. And then in order for DeAndre Jordan to contribute offensively, he needs someone that can run the pick and roll with him, and you can't ask Blake physically to do that like 20 times a game. It's just not reasonable to ask him to do that. So the Clippers are in a little bit of a scary spot here in terms of the way the next few weeks can unfold. We'll hope that they can find a way to stitch it together. I always look at a guy like Patrick Beverley to be a guy who's going to at least demand that his players come out and play with toughness no matter what the situation is. So we'll be as optimistic as we can, but we'll watch them with, I think, a little bit of caution here in the next few weeks that things might not go wonderfully. Let's talk about Denver, a team that's kind of had a reverse journey here. Slow start for them. Lost 3 of their first 4 games. Went 2-2 on the Eastern Coast road trip that ended with a loss to the Knicks. Impressive back-to-back wins versus Toronto and Miami before getting blown out at home Saturday night versus the Warriors. After being the best offensive team in the league for probably about the last 2/3 of last season or so, right now coming into today, 15th in offensive rating, 23rd in defensive rate. That is not going to get you into the playoffs in the Western Conference, not even close. Net rating of minus 1.4, so that's a little better than their offensive and defensive rankings do. Of course, small sample size here for sure. Mike Malone, it seems, was going to start Jameer Nelson at the point guard. but the front office got rid of him right at the end of camp. Jamal Murray is starting there now. One of my favorite prospects in the league, but he is not shooting the ball well at all. Gary Harris is playing very well on both ends of the court, got that big contract, and is certainly doing his part to bring impact to the game. But he's 7th on this team in field goal attempts per 36 minutes, and he leads them in true shooting percentage. That's a problem. Not being able to get the ball to your most efficient scorer, that is a problem. And a significant and fundamental problem. They've got to steer more offensive opportunities towards him. In my mind, Malone hasn't seemed to have settled at all on a closing unit. We've seen Moody in there down the stretch in some games, and when he's in there, the defense just is very willing to sag off and challenge him to hit the 50 jump shot. They'll basically jump the passing lanes to Jokic or Millsap. If Moody has the ball, they'll sag into those passing lanes. Last couple games, Will Barton has been playing well. Not a full-fledged point guard, but in 2 to 3 minute stretches, he could probably handle that responsibility. Had a massive defensive play at the end of one of their recent wins, and now I'm forgetting who that was, but had a nice finish. In fact, I'm curious enough that I want to go look. It was Miami. Deion Waiters got the last look for Miami, and Deion is often quite good in those last possessions. Will Barton's not known as a great defender, but was excellent on that final play, and basically didn't even let Deion get off even a 10% probability shot. So perhaps Barton is kind of earning that 5th spot in the closing unit. We shall see. Their next 3 games at home: Brooklyn, Oklahoma City, or Orlando. This is still a team that's trying to settle in. Had kind of a strange beginning to the season in terms of I think Jokic was like 3 for 10 on opening night, and then he just had 3 field goal attempts in their second game of the season, which was the win over Sacramento. But he seems to be settling in. I said a moment ago that Karl-Anthony Towns was second at the position in PR last year. Jokic was first. Jokic still has a lot of limitations on defense. We'll have to see how that goes. But he does seem to be kind of settling back into that offensive Jokic that we saw last year. So rough start. I think a little difficulty with Jokic and Millsap finding their balance, and then also finding rotation consistency in terms of who's going to play with who, and then how they line up for a unit to close the game. But they seem to be settling in a little bit. Greg, anything interesting you're seeing with the Nuggets?
Yeah, for me, well, this is a team that has a lot of talent. We talked about how we weren't quite crazy about their roster construction, even though they are very talented. Thought they really needed more of a veteran point guard, maybe to play, even if they didn't start, but someone they could go to. But the combination of Murray and Moutier is really are 2 guys who are still learning to play the position. So that's one thing. The second thing is I've noticed that Jokic and Millsap do not look comfortable on the floor together. Both of them look more comfortable on the offensive end when the other is not on the court. I took a quick look, and I think if we look at the lineup where you can look at the two player combinations, I think Millsap and Jokic, in terms of number of minutes played together as a pair, that pair is 8th on the team in terms of minutes played as a pair. So, even Mike Malone has kind of gone away from playing them together. And I think when you get into the closing rotation, you mentioned they're struggling with who should be on the court. Well, Jokic and Millsap are 2 of your best players, but they're not comfortable necessarily playing together. So that's something that they've got to figure out. They've also got some players deep down the bench that just aren't getting on the floor. So they've got an opportunity to make some moves if they need to. Trey Lyles is barely seeing the floor. Hernan Gomez is barely seeing the floor. Even Malik Beasley's not on.
Just jump in. So I don't know if you know, but Juancho's coming back from mono.
No, I didn't know that. But even in the 2 games, he averaged 6.5 minutes. So they do have some players deep in the bench that really aren't seeing a lot of playing time. Trey Lyles is 5.5 minutes a game. Hernan Gomez in the 2 games that he played only played 6.5 minutes. Malik Beasley's less than 10 minutes. They brought in Richard Jefferson. He's only played a few minutes here and there. So this roster, to me, is still a little bit of a mess where you're really solid, maybe at wing 3, 4, and 5, a lot of talent, but they don't look comfortable together. I do think a veteran point guard would help solidify, even if it's a guy who plays 20, 25 minutes a night. I'm not sure they're going to be able to make the kind of adjustments they would need to make mid-season. They may be able to make a tweak here or there. But so far, this is a lot of good players who just haven't really gelled and don't look all that comfortable together yet.
Yeah, it is interesting because you think across the broader part of the game that you're going to benefit by having Jokic and Millsap kind of split time, being the primary front court facilitator. But then if that's your game plan for quarters 1 through 3, the fourth quarter could be really just lacking any sort of rhythm. So that'll be interesting to say. And then you said a point guard that can handle even 25 minutes a game. So you mean a guy like Jameer Nelson, maybe?
Right, exactly. There have been talks that there's interest in Bledsoe. When we get to Phoenix in a minute, we'll talk about the other teams, but that's an interesting approach. Although, I don't like when teams make a knee-jerk reaction where maybe the team feels like they're not playing as well as they should, and now they see an opportunity to make the roster better. Well, now you're just looking to see who's out there. You're not really looking for the right guy like maybe you would in the offseason. So that might be just more of a knee-jerk reaction, which isn't always the best approach.
Yeah, I'd love to see them commit to Jamal Murray because I just think there's so much talent in there. He may not help you be the best team you can be, say, the first 20 to 25 games of this season, but I do think if you commit to him, he's the kind of talent that by game 40, 41, 42 that you're going to kind of hit a nice stride. Okay, let's move over to the Golden State Warriors. By the way, while we're transitioning, not sure if you're watching, I didn't realize how much fun it was going to be to watch all these Sunday night games while we're potting at the same time. I would have been a little worried up front that we were going to be able to kind of focus on what we're talking about. But James Harden said hello a while back in this episode, even though we were talking about the Rockets. But Kristaps Porzingis just raised his hand and said hi. 40 points in a win at home tonight. He entered tonight leading the league in points for 36 minutes and put up 40 on the board tonight. So Knicks fans must be losing their minds with delirious, just being completely delirious over how that's unfolding. So good for Kristaps Porzingis. Okay, Golden State, first in offensive rating. Don't know when that's ever not going to be true. Again, they've been awful on defense, but 20th in defensive rating. There's 10 teams in the league that would trade places with them, even though their defense has been described as abysmal. The consensus has been they basically been terrible as compared to expectations, but here they sit at 7-3 with 3 straight blowout wins in their this past week. The best net rating in the league by 3 points. So I'd hate to see how awesome this team's going to be if they hit their stride. So, Greg, as you watch the Warriors, anything that we could talk about that everybody else is not already talking about?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is I think the Detroit loss was a little bit of a wake-up call because since then they smoked the Clippers by 28 points. They smoked the Spurs by 20. I'm having trouble doing math on a Sunday night, even though I'm a math guy. And then they beat Denver 127-108. So 3 very convincing wins against teams that are probably playoff caliber teams or close to it in the Western Conference since that Detroit loss. I think we talked on a prior podcast about the fact that they did preseason in China. I think it's tough on the body clock, and the media demands in that environment in the preseason are just off the rails. I think they came back to start the season probably running on fumes. Great for the NBA, but not good for a team getting started. But I think even when you kind of get home and you get settled, they played 3 out of their first 4 on the road. Not making excuses, but it's just not an ideal set of circumstances for getting things started. But here they are. They're 7-3, 3 very convincing wins. Number 1, like you said, an offensive rating, struggling in defensive rating. I'll say this: if there's a couple things we want to pick on, I think the bench is struggling a little bit. Last year, the bench, you didn't have, of course, you're always going to have a drop off of some level when you go to the bench. But one thing Golden State didn't have last year was a drop off in shooting. This year, I think Iguodala is shooting like 11% from the 3-point line. Last year, he shot 35. I think Livingston is shot almost nothing. I don't think he's made a 3-pointer this year. Last year, he was 32, 33%. Nick Young is kind of helping them a little bit from the 3-point line. I did take a quick look, and this is almost for fun, but if we take a per 48 and we say the starters versus the bench, what's the scoring? The starters per 48 is 143 points. So basically, if the starters play 48 minutes, they'd average 143 points per game, and the bench is at 86 points per 48 minutes. Huge drop off. However, last year their bench was also at 86 points per 48 minutes. So anyway, go ahead.
So their practices, their scrimmages must be like something like the Globetrotters versus the Generals.
Yeah, if they play first unit versus second unit, yeah, I think that's the case. But here's the bottom line. The bottom line is this team is as good as ever. This team is still head and shoulders above the league. I don't care how many games they win. I think if they wanted to win 73, 74, 75, they could do it. I don't think they care if they win 73, 74, 75. I think what they care about is winning the number one seed, which in this Western Conference is an accomplishment, and getting to the postseason healthy. But the challenge I think that Steve Kerr wants to make sure of is that his team doesn't fall into this sleepwalking scenario where you're trying not to play like at 1,000% every minute of every game. How do you dial it back without sort of losing focus? And as I said before, this is the most detail-oriented team in basketball on an execution level. How do you dial back and not, run yourself into the ground night in, night out, but still pay attention to those details and still be detail-oriented and focused on all the little things? That's the trick that I think Steve Kerr is really thinking about and what he's trying to make sure and watch closely for his team. But this team is way better than everybody else. Again, I'm hoping throughout the season we see developments from other Western Conference teams that will show us that someone could challenge them or at least compete with them in a 7-game series, not because I want Golden State to lose, but because I want to see compelling basketball in the playoffs, and we didn't see a lot of that last season.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll jump in on here is when they get into trouble, it tends to be two things. Turnovers, and I did look, and they are number one in offensive rating and have the best net rating in the league by 3 points plus, and they have the fourth most turnovers. So God forbid how good they're going to be if they get that under control. And the other thing is foul trouble, and I was looking to see if they were like top 8 in the league in personal fouls per game. They're not. They're about league average, but at the same time they play a lot of garbage time. But it tends not to be kind of like fouls per game. It seems to be one or two guys getting their third foul like halfway through the second quarter, what have you. And then when you see their frustration when it's like Steph getting teed up for throwing his mouthpiece, or Draymond getting his first technical foul when it maybe seems like he could have gotten 3 or 4 by then. And then Kerr, did you see the foul language?
I did, yes.
But it tends to be turnovers and fouls that drive all that stuff, right? And so if you watch them play, and if a team is keeping pace, apart from just, again, I don't want to go back and like take credit away from all the wonderful things we said about how the Pistons handled that matchup, right? Pistons deserve a lot of credit, but the Warriors, when they're kind of in a game that's close, it tends to be kind of them shooting themselves in the foot with foul trouble, which muck up their rotations, or turnovers. And they did turn the ball over, I think 26 times against the Pistons, but that wasn't just the Warriors shooting themselves in the foot. That was the Pistons playing excellent defense. Last two teams, let's hit them real quick. Lakers and the Suns. They were not originally on our outline, but they've done some interesting things in the last week. First, the Lakers, 4-5, going tonight's game against, I said it earlier, is it Memphis? I think Memphis is playing them tonight. Negative 1.9 net rating, which is really good compared to expectations. Wins over the Wizards and the Pistons, losses to Toronto, the Clippers, Utah, and Portland. So not really any kind of embarrassing losses apart from that one game where they just stopped playing any transition defense, and Luke just pulled the whole unit off of the court. If I recall correctly, that was on Lonzo's birthday. Offensive rating, 25th best in the league. That might surprise some people with as many highlights as they're producing on the offensive end of the court. Defensive rating would surprise a lot of people, 12th. You add Brook Lopez in the center position, bring in rookies like Lonzo and Kuzma playing, and to get them playing 12th best on defense is quite an accomplishment. Lonzo's play has been up and down. I think we've all heard that Luke is trying to get him to play more aggressively. I think his natural state is to be a facilitator and push and move the ball, but the way that defenses are going to prepare to face that, they're going to force Lonzo to be the aggressor, and Luke is trying to get him to play with confidence. As an aggressor, we'll see how that goes. He's not a great finisher around the basket, but if they're just opening up the lane, he's got to find a way to finish, and he's had some nice moments doing that this past week. Larry Nance Jr. lost to an injury with that fractured left hand, probably going to be out for at least 6 weeks. Kyle Kuzma into the starting lineup, and I don't think personally he's coming out this week. Good news and bad news for the league, Greg. Tough Eastern Conference road trip for the Lakers. Boston, Washington, Milwaukee. That's tough. The good news, if you live on the East Coast and have not had a chance to see the Lakers play, do not miss this week. They only play 15 times in the Eastern Conference, so when you get 3 of them in 1 week, you live on the East Coast, you've got to make sure that you catch them. We're the kind of guys that we're going to DVR games or go back and hit League Pass on the internet or what have you when we need to. Usually on the weekend as we prepare to get ready for a podcast, sometimes we feel like we need to go back and watch a game or two to kind of firm up really good observations and those sorts of things. But hey, East Coasters, this is your chance to watch this really fun Lakers team play. Right now, exceeding expectations. I think I went back and looked. I think they have 4 players. So the 25th in offensive rating, they have 4 players that are averaging 20 points per 36 minutes. That's really unusual. Lopez and Kuzma, Clarkson and Randall, and Randall's doing it pretty efficiently. Lopez efficiently from the 3-point line. Kuzma has good shooting games and not quite as good shooting games. But again, 25th in offensive rating. It seems like they're only going to go up from there if they can all settle in. They're 12th on defense. So that's what I'm looking for here, apart from just kind of having fun watching Lonzo and Kuzma, and Clarkson's had some fun moments, and Randall, they have a decision to make on Julius Randle at the end of the season. He's in great shape, committed to playing with that second unit. It's not feeling downgraded status-wise in terms of how the organization views him by playing on that second unit, like that he's embracing that. So that's my quick overview of the surprisingly good Lakers. Greg, anything you want to add?
Well, before I add my part, I'll kick a question back to you. The question is Kyle Kuzma the Lakers' best player?
Oh, right now?
Yes.
No, I think, well, in terms of, is he the best basketball player, or is he contributing to most to winning basketball? Or like, so for kind of, let me know what you're fishing for.
Yeah, has he been their best player so far this season? So I'm talking about on-court contribution so far this season.
Not consistently. I would say consistently it's been Brook Lopez. And even the first week, like Nance was really solid that first week. I think I only say no because is like most rookies playing up and down, but he's having more ups than downs. Just a trick question, or which way would you go?
No, I would say just because of the absolute weaknesses you get from Brook Lopez on the defensive end, I think you could argue that Kuzma has been. But even the fact that we could ask that question and have that conversation, the reason I brought it up is just the point of even having the conversation and asking the question is a really good development for the Lakers. We both loved Kuzma in the draft. Our team, our favorite team, the Hawks, were picking at 19. I know you really had him targeted. You were on a couple of other podcasts where you thought the Hawks were looking at him. They did bring him in. We both love John Collins and the potential that he has. Kuzma is a better player right now. He's been one of the best rookies in the league. And so I think that the development of Kuzma, the development that he has played his way into the starting lineup and to being an integral player in the rotation this early in his career, considering they drafted him near the end of the first round, is a terrific development for the Lakers. And to hit on the Julius Randle topic, I like Julius Randle a lot. I like what he can do. He and Kuzma, in a way, play the same position. Kuzma probably can play 3 and 4, but Kuzma's probably better suited for the 4 in terms of what he gives you from a matchup standpoint. I still think the Lakers would love to move Luol Deng's contract. There's no doubt about that before they get to the offseason next year. And the better Julius Randle plays, the more that Randle maybe becomes something that they could package with Deng to give to a team that says, like, hey, we're going to give you something with some upside and give you this contract to get something back in order to move Deng off the roster and move his salary commitment for next season, or the next 2 seasons, I think it is. Julius Randle certainly, maybe the better he plays, and maybe it's not just Julius Randle, but the better he plays, the more options the Lakers have in terms of packaging something with Luol Deng to get that contract moved.
Yeah, so the last thing I want to ask you about is a guy that's a bit of a lightning rod is Brandon Ingram. So had an awful rookie year last year. Has looked okay at moments this year. He's such an odd body type for the NBA that he's so long. And we all remember like how much Kevin Durant couldn't bench press when he was coming into the league. That turned out to be not a problem. Durant developed what I think we would call wiry strength, and he made his body into a really wonderful NBA body, even though he's missed some time with injuries. It's not injuries that has to do with core strength issues, but I still view Ingram as a guy who's still struggling. He doesn't have the core strength. When I say core strength, I'm talking about mostly in your abdomen and in the core of your body that most NBA players have. And so people talk about him in a couple ways. One is he a real NBA player? Well, I think that's kind of an insane, or is he going to be a real NBA player? I think he's going to be fine, but I think anytime you talk about him in the context of being a former number 2 overall pick, that's where the conversation kind of becomes a little bit more problematic. And so I just want to kind of close out with this and to get your feedback. I think he's going to be fine. I have no idea what his second contract's going to look like. I have no idea what he's going to look like kind of heading towards restricted free agency in terms of getting an extension or not, because he's not been productive at all. But he's very young, and he has unique length. He's shot the ball very, very well until he got to the NBA, and now it just seems to kind of be in between the ears. But overall, do you agree he's going to be fine so long as people can kind of stop putting that number 2 overall pick tag on him?
Yeah, a number 2 overall pick is either normally projected to be a franchise player or to be sort of your second best player on a team. And it was not a super strong draft that he was a part of. And so I think it's not fair. I think a lot of players in that draft probably have expectations that aren't quite fair based on where they were drafted and the fact that the draft wasn't very strong. But the thing is if Ingram is a rotational player who's a top 7, top 8 guy, even if he plays off the bench, when the Lakers get to where they're a good team and where they're a winning team, and I think they're on a good track, I think their organization's pointing in the right direction, suddenly that 7th or 8th guy is a really, really important player. So even if that's what Ingram is, even if he's never an 82-game starter, and even if he's never one of your best 5 players, he's important. And the player he becomes and grows into is important. So, if he doesn't become one of your best 3 players, to say that he didn't live up to expectations, well, you know what? He didn't set those expectations. Other people did. So I think for the Lakers and Lakers fans is to see contributions from him. He is playing better than he did last season. He is growing and getting better. Yes, he's going to have to get stronger. You mentioned Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett was coming out of high school. Ingram came out after 1 year, so not too big of a difference. But he's going to have to work hard on his body and work hard on his game.
Did I say Garnett or Durant?
You said Garnett.
Oh, well, I meant that's twice I've done that this episode. Good grief. Durant couldn't bench press 135 pounds, just like that. So I was definitely more of a comparison to Durant. But I talked to how Durant had, without becoming big, had turned his body into an NBA body. Ingram has not done that yet, but there's still plenty of time. So it sounds like we're both kind of on the Brandon's going to be fine. Just let him kind of settle into what is a naturally comfortable spot for him, and attaching expectations to him based upon where he was drafted. It becomes problematic when you think about, like I said, for a second contract. You usually see a number 2 overall pick play their way towards the next contract. He's definitely not lining up for that, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be okay. I think he's going to be just fine. Last team, the Phoenix Suns, started 0-3, and a really bad 0-3. Fired their coach, Earl Watson. Jay Triano gets the interim title for 2 cents. Really strong couple of games right after Watson was fired. Wins over Sacramento, Utah, Brooklyn, and Washington. Losses to Portland and New York, so very much up and down play. Up and down is probably a good target for a team that's as young as this team is. They tried to find some stability. They played the Spurs tonight. I think they got blown out by the Spurs last I saw. It was around a 25-point game. I think that was in San Antonio. Not a surprise at all that would happen. As everyone's talked about, I don't know if we can really add anything to this conversation. Greg Bledsoe sent home. I talked about him earlier. Trade market. Have we talked about how we felt about that?
Well, no, I mean, there is a new development today, and the development today is that Bledsoe is back in the team facilities, but they have no plans for him to be back with the team playing, but they have him working out with staff with the clear intent to make sure he stays in shape and to keep his trade value up. So that's one of the developments. The only other thing I'll go back and say about Bledsoe is what he did was not good, but was it unforgivable? The tweet saying, "I don't want to be a part of this team." And if we look from the outside looking in, to me, what that means is there was already a problem. Because if that was the unforgivable sin that came out of nowhere, then it probably wouldn't be an unforgivable sin. That and as an isolated situation. But if there were issues leading up to that, then maybe that became the straw that broke the camel's back, and that's probably more of the situation.
But overall, don't you think this is just poor reflection on the organization? So when we preview the Suns, I had you guess how many games in the D League Bender and Chris played last year, and the answer was 0. And the fact that they were both playing at 18 years old, basically at the 4 and the 5, whichever position you want to call it, against grown men, and how even just 5 games in the D League would help them. And I said the organization failed those young guys. And I have all sorts of issues with Marquise Chris's body language. Hope he can overcome it. So it's certainly his mental approach to the game and his approach to having adversity within a game kind of can get him really off track. But I think this organization is just an absolute joke. Everyone knows Bledsoe was basically sent home the last 2 months of the season last year. Just said, don't show up because you're going to help us win too many games. And then they fired the coach 3 games into the season, which is just about as dysfunctional as the thing gets. I think most people are more sympathetic to Bledsoe, but it was a pretty innocuous tweet, all things considered. There's way, way, way worse things people have done. And to turn around and say, oh, okay, we don't want you around the team, I just think it's insane. But we're talking about things people have talked about for a couple of weeks, so let's kind of get back on track here. I hope Bledsoe can find Bledsoe's a fun player, and seems to be a very respected player across the league, so I think he's going to be fine if he can just figure out where he can play and help the team. But I know, Greg, you had done quite a bit more research on this team than me. You were in on tracking the Triano effect right away. But before I hand it back to you, 23rd offensive rating, 25th in defensive rating, a terrible net rating of negative 7.4. So the measurables here are still really bad. Mike James has been pretty strong at the point guard position as I think a 27-year-old rookie, but lots of international experience there. And it's interesting to watch how the minutes of like Chris and Bender are shaped. So apart from just kind of having a nice kind of lift, it seems, having moved from Watson Triano at the coaching spot, what I see is, despite that 25th defensive rating, it seems like they're much, much more engaged on the defensive end of the court now than they were before, so that Triano at least has them engaged and trying to execute the right things, even if they're inconsistent executing them on the defensive end. Like I said, you've been watching them, I think, a little more closely to me, so tell me what you're seeing.
Well, one of the reasons they worked their way into our agenda tonight is the developments they've had since the coaching change, and immediately the first game they went out and they beat Sacramento, then they beat Utah, they lost to Portland, but in a close game where they played hard. They beat the one at Brooklyn, and their signature win was a win at Washington. So there's been some really good things going on, but here's what I like. Dragan is playing 22 minutes a game. So if he's on the roster, even at 19, he needs to play. 22 minutes a game, I think that's a good slot. Marquese Chriss is in the starting lineup. He has started the last 6 games, but he's playing 20 minutes a game. So Jay Triano has been willing to put him in the starting lineup, but there's been games where he started and only played maybe 12 or 14 minutes. We talked on a previous podcast about how one thing, when we talked about the coaching change, we talked about the fact that Marquese Chriss is the kind of player where a coach has to draw the line and say, we have boundaries on the way you're going to conduct yourself, the way you're going to prepare, the body language. When you don't get the calls, you don't pout, you don't hang your head. When you're not making shots, your effort doesn't drop. That's not the way you're going to play. I've seen better body language from Chriss since the coaching change. I've seen better effort, more consistent effort. But the fact that he's starting and still not playing starters minutes, to me, it tells me Jay Triano has a plan for him. And the plan is sometimes he needs to watch to learn, and sometimes he needs to play to learn. And there needs to be a very clear plan and approach from the coaching staff as to when those times are. So that I think that the situation that has changed in Phoenix since Earl Watson was fired and Jay Triano took over the team has created, yes, there are organizational issues that we think need to be addressed. But again, even the fact that they were 4-4 going into tonight, they were 4-5 going into tonight, then lost to San Antonio. The more important thing than the wins is that they have a healthy environment where young players can grow and develop in a positive way, where poor effort, inconsistent energy level, not paying attention to detail, negative body language will not be tolerated. And I think that they have a better environment in terms of what's on the floor. I see the team is playing more through Devin Booker. I see the team is playing harder together. I've just seen overall just a better vibe among the team. But again, it doesn't just go back to wins. It goes back to, can they create an atmosphere where young players can learn, grow, and thrive? And I think they're better at that today than they were a week or two ago when they made the coaching change.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I would call out here, just trying to kind of connect back to some things you said, there are, to me, obvious ownership issues. I think the fact that Ryan McDonough got the contract extension in the offseason was ridiculous. In no way, shape, or form had he earned that. But there are times when a team on the court just needs to kind of separate their own results and their own focus from what's happening in the broader parts of the organization. I use it as a kind of an example. Go to another league, the NFL, this past week's when Bob McNair made that, what I thought was a really awful statement and poor choice of words. You had players walk out of the facility, but as a team, they were able to kind of regroup by the end of the week and all got re-engaged in what they were doing. And I think they just had to say, look, we're a team. We don't like what our owner said, but we're still going to kind of stay committed to one another, and those sorts of things. I think that's what has to be here with Jay Triano and this team is that, hey, Robert Sarver, one of the more weird owners in the league, and certainly doesn't kind of set a tone of stability at the top, as a tone of investment and commitment, to the right things, and then with their GM. But I think if we just watch this team on the court, you are seeing good. You're seeing boundaries set for Chriss and how he's approaching the game mentally, and those sorts of things. Also, I think this is a good time to talk about the fact that the G League has got started this weekend. And we talked in the past about the fact that Mike James is on a 2-way contract, which allows him to be with the Phoenix Suns for 45 days only. And we mentioned before that after he has 45 days with the team, it doesn't mean they automatically lose him. It just means they have to convert him to at least a veteran minimum contract so they can keep him. And since he's starting at the point guard position, and I know he's had some up and down games, but overall he's playing pretty well. I think he's going to end up basically not playing a lot of time in the G League and playing a lot with these Suns, which is a good thing. But just to share with listeners, if you're seeing guys move from if you're watching the transactions, you're seeing such and such players signed to the G League. A lot of those guys are on two-way contracts that have a limitation on how many days they can spend with the varsity squad, if you will, before they get converted over. So I'll just say, for example, with the Hawks, the team that Greg and I both root for most, just because we grew up in the area down there, Josh Majette got sent out to Erie to play with the Bayhawks there after playing some rotation minutes early in the season. But I think the plan is not for Majette to be with the Hawks for 45 days or more this season. That could have completely changed on Mike James, because when we talked about the intro with them, we talked about the fact that they probably got to add a guard because they're so slim at the guard position, and the fact they all have to add a big because Alan Williams is out for extended time. I don't know when Jared Dudley's going to be ready to play, and I think there's another injury at the position that I'm just not recalling off the top of my head. They're really thin. Alex Lynn and Tyson Chandler, I think, are the only guys available at that position apart from the really young guys, Chris and Bender. Take a quick look here. It was at just Williams and Dudley. But at the guard position, they lost Brandon Knight for the season. Devon Reed's out for about half the year. So they're just kind of thin. So I would guess James does spend most of the season with them, and that they're looking to add. So encouraging things from the Suns, encouraging things from the Lakers. It brings to my mind who's going to be the 15th best team in that Western Conference, and it seems like no one's just cashing all their chips in, aiming for that bottom. Is there a team that I'm not seeing that I should be aware of?
Well, in the standings, it's Dallas, and Dallas, I think that.
Oh, they seem to. Yeah, sorry, this is where it gets choppy sometimes. You're right to call Dallas. Dallas seems very comfortable with where they are.
And I'll say Dallas is, Dallas. I think they only have one win. Atlanta got their second win today, so Dallas looks like they're getting comfortable at the bottom of the Western Conference. I'll just say it that way. Cuban's
a pretty strategic guy. I was going back and forth on whether I wanted to make any comments on the Cuban statement about Green's statements. I'll just be short and say that I think Cuban was trying to put a message out there that kind of defended the quote owners in the league and his place in the league, but I think that he got off track with things that he said. If you are more interested in hearing more about that, hit me up on social media. You want to say something, Greg?
Yeah, I'll say this. Yeah, I agree, because when what he said turned into a soundbite, it was very, very negative. If you read his full quote, which is pretty long, what you'll see is he was being defensive and saying, I as an NBA owner work very, very, very hard to help and support every player in my organization as much as possible. And that goes far beyond basketball into their personal lives, where there's financial guidance or whatever it is. So what he was saying is I'm not an owner who really sort of only takes advantage of what the player can bring to my organization. I try to give as much to them or more as I can. So to say that we're just an owner and we treat the players like an asset isn't fair. When it turned to a soundbite, and Mark Cuban has to be aware of that. He's a public figure. He's been a public figure for a long time. He has to be aware of the soundbite impact, but also if people want to take a look at what he had to say and you read deeper into what he had to say, he was defending the fact that he believes that there are NBA owners like himself who make a great effort and try to go above and beyond to have a positive impact in the life of every player who plays for them. And so I just want to throw that out there, not to defend Cuban. I think that he misstepped when he said what he said, but it was interesting to read the full quote and to try to understand exactly what he was trying to say.
Okay, now I am going to say what's wrong. I had some major issues with some of the things he said. I will say this, his track record backs up the general intent of a statement. I do think players that have played for him all seem to reflect positively around how he's contributed to them and supported them and what they've tried to achieve. But I will say this, as a white person in this country, when a person of color is speaking, I do think that our first objective should be to listen, because that person is speaking from an experience that we don't have And so I wish that Cuban would have been a little bit more deferential. Not that he didn't have a right to defend himself, but where I think he got really off track was when he talked about what Draymond Green did and did not learn at Michigan State. And when he said that he would pay for Green to take business classes, but only if he would go where Mark Cuban thought he should go get that education. You put that into the context of the social history of our country in terms of the white person saying, I will support you getting X and Y and Z, but you should do it how and where I want you to get it. That's super problematic for me. So that's where I thought that is just really, really misguided. So even if he wasn't intending to kind of sound like he was talking down to a person of color, it came off as 2 or 3 things he said I had real issues with. So that's my opinion. Just going to put it out there that, if you want to say the term owner means I own shares, not persons. And I try to be constructive, but when you start talking specifically about that one person's experience educationally or whatever, that's where it gets really, really, I think, way, way off base for me. Okay, so we'll try to I think it's the first time we've ever become political, but it really bothered me. So I wanted to get that out there. Okay, so Lakers and Suns tracking ahead of the Mavericks last season, but the results aren't quite there yet, even if some of their young guys look good. So they look like they're struggling a little bit, but I think we've covered these teams. So in 2 weeks, we'll come back. We'll definitely talk about Portland then. We'll definitely come back and talk about Utah then. Houston will give us no choice but to talk about them again. Next week, we'll come back and hit the Eastern Conference teams. We'll at least hit the teams that we did not hit last week. So look forward to catching up on Milwaukee. New York is really doing some interesting things as well. The Nets got off to a fast start. Now they're slowing down a little bit. So lots to talk about the Eastern Conference next week. Anything else today, Greg, before we sign off?
I'll just say, if you live in a G League area, go out and watch basketball. The G League is becoming more and more and more important for new teams this year. Almost every team has a dedicated G League team. So more and more you're seeing players who are going to be NBA players. Also, I'll say it was good to see Miles Turner back on the floor with the Pacers tonight, a very exciting young player on a team that's doing well. I know it's Eastern Conference isn't on the agenda tonight, but I'll say it was good to see Miles Turner back on the floor, an exciting development there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Oladipo continues to do interesting and fun things as well, where we're both tracking that. Again, we see him as a guy who, for the first time in his NBA career, is kind of freed up to be his real self. Not totally sure what the upper boundary possibility is there, but excited to kind of just see him unleash and see what he can be. We both like him. We like the way that he plays as a teammate. We like the way he plays as himself. But is in a situation where he can just kind of unleash his best self. So definitely having a lot of fun with that. That's why we're called the Full Court Press podcast, because we intend to cover the full league, everybody. I'm just as excited about Victor Oladipo as I am, say, Lonzo Ball. And that doesn't mean I'm not excited to watch Lonzo Ball and see what he can do, but that's just how we're a little bit different here. We're not always going to be talking about the national storylines. We're going to dig in everywhere. So with that, next week, we'll come back and talk about roughly half of the Eastern Conference. Greg, social media plugs before we get out.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter @Press Podcast. Glenn has been putting out some awesome video stuff. Really, really, really good stuff. I think it's as good as anything you'll find out there in the NBA Twitter land. So give us a follow, especially to see what Glenn's putting out there. And on Facebook, we are at Full Court Press NBA.
Okay, thanks, guys, as always, for listening. Appreciate you tolerating us talking about every team except Houston, but talking about Houston 5 times and a little bit of a political bend there at the end. We'll come back next week and talk about another fun week of NBA basketball. So enjoying being into the middle of this season. Hope you guys are enjoying it as much as we are. Thanks, as always, for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Full Court Press Podcast. Subscribe free on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Store. Follow the Full Court Press NBA Podcast on Twitter @Press Podcast.
Hi, it's me, that little voice inside your head. You spent all year taking care of business. Let Office Depot Office Max take care of you. there's this new HP Pavilion laptop with 8th generation Intel Core i5 processor. Save $200. Now just $449. Look at it. It's only $449 at Office Depot Office Max. Go ahead. You deserve it.
Taking care of business.
Offer ends 11/11. Limit 1.